Morning. Microphones are working very well this morning. So this, we're going to have a brunch next week, and the next brunch on the 24th is going to be Gary Zola, who has been here many times. It's been a while since he's been here, and he's going to talk about ballot box priorities, which will certainly be interesting. And Beth Abraham will be joining us for that. And then that's the last brunch until the first of the year. So today, though, we have Rabbi Dr. Shmuel Klatzkin and Vicki Miner, who is part of our committee, worked with the rabbi and coordinated this and speaking today. I'm going to turn it over to Vicki, who's going to introduce the rabbi for the speaking today. Yeah.
Dr. Klatzkin is the Associate Rabbi of Chabad of Greater Dayton, Ohio, an academic advisor at the Jewish Learning Institute, JLI. He has taught as an adjunct professor at Wright State University and Antioch Midwest, and served as an advisor and referee for the last doctoral laureate from UD's Marianist Institute. Dr. Klatzkin received a master's in ordination from HUC Cincinnati and a doctorate in medieval Jewish philosophy from Brandeis University. While still a student, he began teaching Judaic studies in Jewish day schools, which he continued to do so for almost 20 years. Dr. Klatzkin was one of the initial developers of JLI's first course and collaborated on the establishment of the style and pattern of JLI courses that is followed today. Over the years, he was author or editor of many JLI courses, including To Be a Jew in the Free World. Dr. Klatzkin has translated and edited DVDs of talks of the Lubavitcher Rebbe for Jewish educational media, and was a contributing editor to Wellsprings, a journal of Hasidic thought. He continues writing and editing today as a freelancer. He has been a featured speaker from coast to coast in the US and Canada and in the UK and Ireland, and worked in the US, Canada, and Asia for OK Kosher certification. Dr. Klatzkin.
Thank you so much, Vicki. I'm proud to call you a student. We've enjoyed how many, 2 years now, or 3? Working in intensive Hebrew, and she's able to read and translate right from the Tanakh in the original Hebrew. And I'm very, very proud. I'm also very happy to be back here speaking at Temple Israel. You were the first people to invite me to speak when I came to Dayton back in 1990, many years ago, as a teacher at the Hillel Academy. And I was gratified and touched when about 90 people showed up for a talk that I gave on Maimonides back in the old temple building. And it was a real high point, and I remember it fondly, and thankful to this day for a wonderful way to be received by my new home, where I've been now for what is this, 30, 34, going on 35 years, coming up now. I was really touched by the invitation as well. And then seeing that it was in the name of the institution that was set up by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz in honor of this Day of Jewish Learning, a worldwide Day of Jewish Learning. The theme that I was told was one people, the connection that binds Jews together in memory and destiny across the world. The founder of that institute, Rabbi, and his motive, the force behind this worldwide Day of Learning that we're part of today, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, was someone who I knew personally and had a tremendous effect on my life. And as part of speaking about the importance of Jewish learning and how this binds us together as people, I'm going to weave that together with the story of how it brought me into a life of Jewish learning and of Jewish commitment, how he figured as a person, and to give, not just in kind of big abstractions, which are nice and wonderful. I've spent a lifetime in teaching and reading and studying, and I deal with abstractions every day. But if they're not connected to real life and grounded in what moves our heart and what moves us to action within the world, they're not of a great deal of use. We're talking about Jewish learning, which has had the tremendous effect of binding us together as people over thousands of years, of getting us through the worst things that the world can throw at any people. And yet, here we still are. Here we still sit and talk with each other. Here we try to find a way together to bring out what it is, this miraculous thing that's going on in our being as Jewish people, and connected as we intrinsically are to the great book, which, if we speak of Torah in its broadest sense, includes not only the written Torah and the discrete books of the Hebrew scripture of Tanakh, but also oral Torah in all the books that are written and stem from the Torah itself through every generation, as we wrestle with God and the Word, as we've done since our ancestor Jacob, whose very name, Yisrael, the name that we call ourselves as a people, means that, the one who wrestles, who struggles with God. And in that, not solely as a gift given to us for which we don't have to work, something which we have to contribute and get down into it and observe ourselves, we find the meaning of who the Jewish people are and who we are within that people. So this will be a little bit of a story. And the story is the main thing. Just a few days ago, I got a letter I saw an advert as I was driving down here for Medigold Insurance. We've been on that since we graduated into Medicare when we turned the proper age. An interesting thing said that we're going to have a new program coming out we'd like you to participate in. We're sending college-age students, people who like this, to sit and talk with you about your life. The idea of getting your life story down. Now, this is an interesting thing. I've been involved with people who do oral histories on a very large scale, but that it's being pushed by an insurance company who is, of course, looking at a bottom line, meaning that they're seeing that there's a measurable even in financial terms, good that's coming out of people telling their story to others. Speak something about how central the story is to us as human beings. Not in some abstract way, but to our health. Health measurable in terms that an insurance company is willing to invest in it and see that it has something good coming from it. This is something that we know from our Jewish sources. Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest of all the rabbis, was having a discussion that's recorded in a book called Sifra. It's one of the earliest midrashim that was ever written. I think the time it was set into writing was about the year 130, 150 of the Common Era, something like that. It's a long way back. And then the topic of discussion was, we've got this immense culture. We've got all these 613 mitzvahs. That's dizzying. When there's too much choice, you don't know where to go. How can we order that? What is a principle that can kind of bring it into focus? What is a general idea that'll help us understand it and integrate it, make it part of our life? And Rabbi Akiva said, he quoted the middle of the 5 books of our Torah, the book of Leviticus, which often, certainly as a kid, I thought that was the most boring thing in the world. What's this? Animal sacrifices, purity, impurity. But right in the middle of it, there is a section where you have this most famous verse, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love neighbor as yourself. Rabbi Akiva said this, looking for a great principle in the Torah, here it is. And so important, well, why did he know it was so important? because already there had been a tradition passed down, another beautiful story, of a rabbi from 3 generations earlier than him, 3 or 4, Hillel, the elder, who had been approached by a guy who another great rabbi had found his motives very questionable. He came to him and said, I want to convert to Judaism, and I want you to teach me the whole Torah while I stand on 1 foot. And the rabbi said, this guy is serious. He had, those days rabbis weren't professionals, they didn't get paid for being rabbis, they had to work a job. So he was carpenter, he was building, he had a measuring rod in his hand, he just, go. Sent him away. So he went over to the other head rabbi then, Hillel, and he posed him the same thing. Teach me the whole Torah while I stand on 1 foot. And Hillel, according to all reporting, he was a man of remarkable patience, said to the guy, okay, I'll do that. Whatever you hate people doing to you, don't do to them. That's the entire Torah. Everything else is just a commentary. What's the last part of that?
Don't study.
Now don't study it. Sometimes people forget that last part. Because that was his point. I'm giving you the key to enter into the kingdom. That's not the whole thing. You wanted to know the whole thing? I mean, no sane person thinks you can know everything about anything while you're standing on 1 foot, much less the Torah. But I'll take your challenge. Can I give you the key to the kingdom? That I can. Loving your neighbor as yourself. What's key to that? Well, it puts everything into a relationship. Everything we do is in relationship to other people. Wherever we go, we're running into somebody else. And wherever we are then, the Torah is with us. How am I behaving with this person? Am I acting to that person the way I'd like that person to act to me? Or at the very least, not doing to them to something that's absolutely hateful to me? That's going to be everywhere. The idea then is the Torah to be everywhere. And it gives you this idea that instead of being strange little behaviors that are asked or just old stuff that's there that has no meaning, you can understand everything in it. We can find our way into it when it touches our heart and we see there's something in here that expresses love to my community now, where it is, that binds me to them, and to everybody who came before me in previous ages. And the rabbi said, okay, run with it. Where do you learn? Where do you study Torah? Asked the Talmud. Le'olam, always a person should study Torah in the place that their heart has the desire for. Something will draw you. Something will call to you. Something will speak your name. And you follow that, and you will be able to find your entrance into it. So love is not just some, nice thing that you say, a platitude. It's a practical way to go forward in what we're talking about in Torah study. Now, how's this related to telling stories? Because in that very thing where Rabbi Akiva said, this is the great principle, his student, of course, said, no. I'll tell you something that's even deeper than that. Something that's more important and more basic than loving your fellow. So his student, Ben Azai, said to him, most important is this verse in Genesis, where it says, Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the story of Adam, which is one way to read Toldot. It also means the children, the descendants of Adam. But the same word we use in Hebrew, meaning your physical descendants, and history. History, we use the word Toldot to speak of a history. So this is the book of the story and the history. That story is right in the English word history of Adam. Why is that so important and deeper than loving your fellow? So the last half, what's the story about? The verse continues, in the day when God created Adin, the human being, in the image of God did he create it. So what was the student saying to the teacher? He was saying, your verse says, love your neighbor as yourself. What if I hate myself? What if we have, like people will sometimes run through in their life, teenagers are pretty prone to do it, a period of nihilism. You can't stand anything around you. Very difficult to be at home in your own life. Sometimes we have periods in the world where such philosophies reign. What about that? And then how can you love anybody else? If you don't have, if you can't stand your own light, said the student of Rabbi Akiva, here's where you get to be able to stand and love your own light. What is the core of our humanity? You're created in the image of God. This is an amazing doctrine. The idea that we are of inestimable worth. People cannot be treated as disposable, as fungible, as reducible to their utility. There was a great thinker who was saying, well, I have this video, as good a playwright as he was, we were talking just at the table just before this, how geniuses have their weak sides where they lack common sense. George Bernard Shaw was talking about what would happen if he had power. He said, well, every 5 years or so, we'd have a commission that people would have to appear before, and we'd say to people, justify your existence. And if they couldn't do it, well, we would get rid of them humanely, he said, with gas, probably. This was, of course, before the Holocaust. So here's a man that we revere as a fine man of letters and a man of interesting social thinking, and yet the idea of the human being representing God was lacking. And people came along who had similar ideas and who were much more poorly disposed, certainly towards the Jewish people, and in the end towards everybody and themselves. It brought such such that's been unparalleled in the history of the human race. What happened? We know it. We were prime targets of that hatred being disposed of in such a way. The key to what's developed everything good, I might go so far to say, I'll go out on a limb and say that in developing societies that work, because if you remember, Greek democracy collapsed of its own weight, didn't have an idea to save it from itself, and collapsed into demagoguery. That the founders, when looking to make our Constitution, looked and strived to find a way that they could avoid those pitfalls. The clearest evasion of it came through something that we Jews introduced into the mind of the world. And through all the modes that our tradition has spread out beyond our religion, throughout Europe and throughout the world, there was this idea in it, underlying, that the human being is created in the image of God. There's something lovable, worthy, that is the core of who we are, and if we haven't found it, that means we need to struggle further and dig deeper and find it, because it's there. That's who we have been created. That, said the student to the teacher, is even greater, because you can't love until you know what you're worth yourself. Then you can say, oh, like I value myself and my life is worth living, and I know that. That's what I do every day, go out and try to be something to go further, go deeper, go higher, whatever it might be, and live what I'm here in the world to do. And everybody else is like that, and I need to treat them like that. It's founded on that idea underlying it. So what do we have right away? To see what Torah study is about, we see a great teacher. If you're going to look in the whole history of the rabbis in the time of the Talmud, the Mishnah, which spans centuries, most people will say, if you're going to say the greatest of all the teachers, would be Rabbi Akiva. At the very least, he's on a short list of maybe 3 or 4. And what do we find when he's telling you about what he thinks is the most important and the deepest and the central thing in Judaism? His student says, and do we say as a result of that, you dare to contradict your teacher? Out with you, you're no longer going to be part of this. Certainly you can lose your rabbi's title. No, we put it right after him and no follow-up from his teacher there. And if you think this was unusual, or if you think this was against the grain and the real thing was otherwise, let me give you another example. We'll skip a few hundred years down the line into the Talmud and tell another story, because the story illustrates something deeper than many of the legal abstractions in the Talmud, as much as I love them and spend endless hours. The great rabbi in the land of Israel, after the Jewish community had kind of lessened the importance there after the destruction of the temple more than a few hundred years had gone by. The main center was in Babylonia. There were still some yeshivas in the north of Israel, in the Galilee region. And the greatest of the rabbis there was Rabbi Yochanan, who lived a very, very long life. And he was an extraordinary teacher. And his teachings were brought back to Babylonia to be in the Talmud by rabbis who'd go back and forth and relate what was going on in one center of study to another. Rabbi Yochanan was, they tell us, was a man of an extraordinarily handsome appearance. He was just an incredibly attractive guy physically. And one time he was out somewhere and he saw a guy that he saw something in. Somehow he worked his way close to him. The man was, his name was Shimon ben Lakish. And his occupation was gangster, such as they had it back then. He was involved in a gang of people who robbed people, strong-armed people, and he was good at it, and he was doing just fine. And Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said to him, "You're so handsome. We've got a lot of women who would really like to enjoy time with you. And why don't you devote your beauty? In Hebrew, it doesn't mean just for women. It's, why don't you devote that to women, not just your wife?" And he said to him, "Why don't you devote your soul to Torah?" And he was able to bring him in. And he became an outstanding student. He's known in the literature, sometimes by his name, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, sometimes he's just called Reish Lakish. And what's he famous for? We have page after page of really intense debate between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. And he is contradicting him at every turn. And the law gets elucidated through that. It's put through tension. We find it, we explore all the angles, and at the end, sometimes the law follows one, sometimes it follows the other. At the end of the day, when a vote came and you had to make a decision. Like, they're always arguing. Rabbi Shimon died before his teacher, who lived, as I said, to a very long age. And many were the people who were in the school there, in the yeshiva, who wanted to take Rabbi Shimon's place. And when Rabbi Yochanan would say some teaching, they would say, "Oh, yes, Rabbi Yochanan, that's backed up by this source here, and this source here, and this source here." And they would talk like that till finally Rabbi Yochanan said when one of them did that, "Don't you think I know what sources that came from? I've been at this longer than you have. I know all of those things. I don't need you to tell me, all the sources where I got my thought from. Where is somebody like Rabbi Shimon who can give me another source, bring you another opinion, and help us get deeper? Help us sort the whole thing out by finding the things I might not have thought about. And he would find out the things he might not have thought about." And that is our Jewish effort. That's at the core of Jewish learning. It's not so much, it's wonderful that we have a whole structure of Jewish law from it. It's wonderful that we have many established principles from it. But the core of it is this wrestling with God and this ability to wrestle with each other when we speak in the name of what God's Torah is, which every one of us can do. It's our heritage. It belongs to us all equally. All of us can argue for that point. And the idea of studying Torah, what this day is about, is let's find a way to let our heart direct us so we can get deeper into it, so we can do it better. We can go deeper. We can help others be. Our conversation can help them do that. And we draw closer to each other. We find how we affect each other and bring out the best in each other. And we find as we do that we get deeper and deeper insight into what our ancestors were doing and what they meant. It's not some obscure little thing that happened in Poland or Morocco or Babylonia or Persia or Yemen. All of a sudden, that's what they were talking about. Here's the real life situation that was going on. And all of it ultimately is about how do we live this life that's centered on revealing our divine potential, on revealing a life that's lived in love with others, where we try to bring out the fullest value in who they are and their insights and all their gifts. And we're not insulted by it. We step back, we find a way to put down our ego, to tamp it down so we can learn more, not think that our cup is always full so that we can pour some more into it and be able to have another drink of the wine of Torah, the deepest things and the most beautiful. These things come from how I was led into Torah. There are all kinds of ways. I could be here all night to talk. I wish we could just sit down and in the Chabad tradition, we have a thing called the Fabrengen. People sit around together and we eat, having a little l'chaim, and sometimes people talk all night, just talking about things that really matter in an informal way. But sometimes the informality allows us to get a lot deeper than we would otherwise. But let me tell you how I got here and how I got to be able to meet Rabbi Steinsaltz in Israel. I grew up in a home where we were proud to be Jewish. We never tried to be anything else. My father said, no Christmas tree in our house, no Hanukkah bush. We have a beautiful heritage. Don't have to pretend to be anything else. We have lots of friends that are other religions. Go, be friends with them, do everything, but stand on what's your own too. Understand it. Sunday school, went to Hebrew school, bar mitzvah, and actually I really liked it. We had a great rabbi. His name was Joshua Haberman, really quite an intellectual, and he wrote some books that were really quite interesting. He was a rabbi in Trenton, New Jersey, where I was a kid growing up, and later, after about 15 years in Trenton, maybe a little more, he went on to Washington, D.C. and became a senior rabbi in the Washington Hebrew congregation, which is like the flagship congregation in D.C. And he just passed away about 5 years ago. He was well into his 90s. But a remarkable man, and I liked him a lot. And he had his eye on me when I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, and when I was at Hebrew school one day in the hall, he asked me into the office, and he said, I heard you're having this project, I don't know how I heard about it, that you're having to do research into a profession that you might be interested in when you grow up. Project in public school that I went to. And I said, yes, so what'd you pick? And I said, well, I'm looking into the law and politics. And those are the things I was interested in from an early age. And the rabbi said, wouldn't you like to look into maybe checking out being a rabbi? And I tried to be very polite, and inside I was thinking, boy, he doesn't know me at all, this rabbi. And so it went. I went to from that public school, I went to a Quaker for high school. He didn't like that idea. He said, you've got your own religion, He didn't, being informative, he was like, yeah, I thought, okay, he's a nice rabbi, but this is the kind of Jewish life to be. I was very impressed by the Quaker school, and their mode of spirituality was very different and new to me, and had great teachers there, and there was an atmosphere of being interested in spiritual things that struck home and was nice. There were other things, the culture was hitting there too. I was in high school in the late 60s, and we got hit full bore with what was going on there, and since we had a lot of people who were kind of really into counterculture, I got pretty aware of all the things that were going on there. And as a result of that, I was reading books by poetry, Allen Ginsberg, writings of Jack Kerouac, mystics in the American tradition and the English tradition, reading about the Hindu mystics, reading about Muslim mystics. Didn't read anything yet about Jewish mystics. Hadn't hit that. I was just seeing all these other things. Read Aldous Huxley, the great author. I had read his book, Brave New World, loved it. George Orwell, I read right when I read 1984, these guys were really seeing what's wrong with the world. Then I read another book by Huxley then called The Doors of Perception. What was that about? Well, he quoted from the visionary poet Blake. That's the title, was that only the doors of perception were open, the things that we would see. I'm just paraphrasing Blake on that. And it was all about how he experimented with something which was quite legal at the time he wrote the book, mescaline, which is the active ingredient of the peyote cactus that Indians and Native Americans had used in Mexico and the southwest US as part of kind of their worship, opening up the mind to other things. It was a really interesting book, intense book, and excited me. And that was the time of the psychedelic revolution as well. And I was very much caught into that culture. When I went off to college, I spent probably more time running around following the Grateful Dead throughout New York and New England area. And actually, we even had a fellow who recorded with Grateful Dead and played with them, who was going to Brandeis for a master's in music at the same time. And he found the little place where I and my Grateful Dead friends at Brandeis had a little cottage that was our own, and we had a big room where we played music just about every day. He came and joined in with us, and we got backstage with Grateful Dead. So we were really deep into it. And to me, that was where spirituality was. And that was where the whole world was opening up, a deepening perception, and of things which seemed really worthwhile. Of course, the problem was that whole thing collapsed into disorder, into addiction, into wrecked lives, because people were we have everything, all we have is the doors, perception have been opened, everything's going to be just right. Didn't seem to be quite enough. Woodstock was in the summer of 1969. In December, just 6 months later, a little less, was Altamont, where you've ever seen the film where the Rolling Stones playing at Altamont, you see a guy being murdered by the Hells Angels right on camera, and that was just one small part of it. It was crushing, falling apart of things that I had been part of. So I was looking, what's lasting out of this? I don't want to follow that. I stayed away. Thank goodness I never got addicted to anything. And I didn't wreck my life as a kid. And I said, well, but where can I keep the vision going? If this isn't happening and this is falling apart. Well, I met old traditions at the school, read about the Vedanta tradition in India, was very deeply read about Sufi mystics, saw in the Quaker tradition Christian mysticism. If they called themselves Christian, sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. So where do I have a place in all of this? And where does Torah study come into this? I wasn't even thinking in those terms. But what got me to think in those terms? Well, the people at the center of that kind of culture, the hippie culture and the psychedelic culture, there were some really good thinkers there. The author Ken Kesey, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, very much involved. He put out something right at this time, 1971, in the summer. Anybody remember the Whole Earth catalog? They were putting up the last Whole Earth catalog then, and then the guy who was putting that out knew, he said, why don't you put out something to kind of wrap it up from your place too? He put it the last supplement to the Whole Earth catalog. Of course, Robert Crumb, the guy who was the underground comic strip, did a takeoff on Da Vinci's last supplement, or the last supplement here, and had his kind of hippie mystic, Mr. Natural in the center of the whole picture. But why don't I bring this out? It's just a curiosity. The very first article that Kesey wrote in this changed my life. The Bible, it says, here's this guy who was the Pied Piper of LSD and set up the whole thing with the Grateful Dead became famous, the acid test that went on and kind of unleashed this culture. Talked about how what guided him in his life, what got him back from the bad places that he got into, was reading the Bible. And he spoke about it, not in a preachy way, because he was always wrestling with this himself. Sometimes he'd write terrible, very, very antagonistic things about various forms of organized Christianity. But he stayed with this thing every day, read from the Bible. Every day, read from the Bible. Read, he said, weekday, read from the Old Testament, as he called it, being coming from a Baptist background. On Sunday, read from the New Testament. Okay, good enough for Kesey. This took me aback. Kesey was always blowing my mind. Okay, I'll do this too. And it started to be a habit, and I started to read it. Another thing that Kesey pointed to in this book that I found more about later, he had a little section called tools for my chest, people that he found particularly useful in leading a good life. And the very first person that he talks about is Martin Buber. And he writes at the beginning of this, and pardon me, I know readers to be able to do this. All my life it was nearsighted, I could just read it closer and it would work, but it doesn't work now. And he writes like this: you can read I and Thou in 2 hours and not get over it for the rest of your life. Buber tells you how you stand either in a dialogical relationship to the creative force or in a position of havingness where you are a thing bounded by other things. If history is a dialogue between the deity and mankind, we can understand its meaning only when we are the ones addressed, and only to the degree to which we render ourselves receptive. Oh, I gotta follow that. I started to read Martin Buber. I read over I and Thou, and then I read the Hasidic stories of Martin Buber, which blew me away. This was deeply interesting. It was manifesting this idea, that thing that I felt when I was feeling spiritually open, as I very much did before that. I'm finding something in my own tradition that is touching these deep points that had so excited me there before. Who was leading me to it? Christian guy high on LSD. Didn't matter to me. I mean, I was into that too. But these are the kinds of things that happen in people's lives where, because it's a part of the wholeness of a universe which belongs to God, every ounce of it, every speck of it, every moment in time, it's all tied together. Everything is tied together. We can expect to see some place in our life where our heart is touched and there's a path that opens up. This is a fundamental idea that flows from the very first chapter of Genesis. How does this lead to Rabbi Steinsaltz? One step after another. The things came together in my mind. What was lacking and what I needed to do in my life now was to go into an old tradition that spoke about these things and could preserve them over time and keep us focused on them. And I'd read all these other traditions and, well, what do I see in the great musicians that I like? Let's say I loved the guitarist Jerry Garcia, the lead guitarist in Ryterband. What gave him his grounding in music? He spent years going around following bluegrass banjo players, recording them on the old reel-to-reel tape recorders, breaking them down, getting into a genuine musical tradition and becoming a part of it. That enabled him, when he came to go freely into music, he had a discipline underlying it all, and he was rooted. The good blues guitarist and listened to the great blues traditional players, whether the recordings of Robert Johnson, the later electric blues players, it didn't matter. They knew it, they were part of it, they were conversant with it. And I said, well, let me apply this to my own tradition, to my own. I need to be grounded in something, and where I already have a grounding in Judaism. I grew up in this. I have connections in it. This is the honest thing to do, to go to where my own roots lie. And so after all those years, I wrote back to my rabbi, to Rabbi Haberman, and said, you know what? I think you were right. I think I'm going to go and study to be a rabbi. And he wrote me a most extraordinary letter. So in the story, I thought I discarded that letter a long time ago because it was in my heart and I didn't need to have it anymore. And one move after another, throughout time, I wasn't organized to take things like that from my teenage period, early 20s. I was just up at, down south in Cincinnati at the American Jewish Archives about a month ago. A Hasidic friend had come in to do some research there. And he wanted my help because I had worked there when I was over at HUC, and he wanted a little word of help in the lens. He was looking to find evidence of some place where how Chabad fit into American Jewish history. And what's one of the things he found? In the large file of material that Rabbi Haberman donated to the archives, here was the letter that my rabbi had written to me back in November of 1972. And it's quite the letter. I won't go into all of it, it won't make sense, but the crucial paragraph is here. And part of it is talking about me deciding to study, to go into a career in the rabbinate. But it applies really to all of us, because Torah study is not meant to be just for rabbis. If the rabbi is any good, one thing the rabbi can get across is that we all need to study. We are the people of the book. We don't just delegate that to professionals. It's not that kind of thing. That's the way it was in Egypt. You had the professionals who took care of the learning and the law, and everybody else eventually just became way down at the bottom of the Torah at home. We have an egalitarian idea that we're all meant to do this. So here he writes, the rabbinate requires all this and more. Let me first tell you what's not required of the theological student as I see it. I don't believe that a rabbinic student must have a neatly ordered theological mind before entering a program of study. It's not even necessary that he be able to articulate clearly his belief in God. However, he should be possessed by a powerful desire to embark upon a search for religious truth and religious experience, lifelong in duration. The Jewish ideal is not having all the answers, but raising all the questions and searching for the answers. The Jew who wants to be a rabbi cannot take life for granted. He must examine the implicit mandates which are part of Jewish existence. Even if I must think and act in faith that such meaning exists and rigorously pursue the search thereof. This search, translated into the vocabulary of Judaism, means study. The mitzvah which, according to the sages, is equivalent of all the other commandments. So here was something that helped me get going. He also talked about, he said, don't be caught up in the boundary of the particular way you came. Seek out Jews from everywhere. Don't be afraid of people who are more traditional than you. And go to find where you find the spirit of it is alive. And study and seek things and be challenged and grow from it. And it so happened that a few months after this, it was my 21st birthday, and I had just seen in the new place that I moved to between semesters with my friends at school, there was a little shul around the corner. I thought, wow, looks like a conservative temple. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go there on my birthday. I saw that they had daily services. I'd never gone to a daily service in my life. So I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go on my birthday over there. And so I did. I went there. I walked in the door. And, you know, when you get in far enough that you can't just easily disappear, because people saw you already, and you'd be embarrassed and you'd embarrass them, that's when I realized that this place wasn't conservative, it was Orthodox. And I had no intention of going to be one of those crazy people. But it was the beginning of an amazing friendship with a rabbi who took me into his home, became a regular guy there on Shabbos, and he worked with me all that year and said, you can read Hebrew? Good. Well, read the prayers. Read the prayer book? Go ahead. You can do it. I said, really? I'm going to HUC next year. Yeah, go ahead. And I learned, he learned. It got me ready. It got me ready for what I was doing. Now that year also, I was able to study and tie together with Kesey, because at Brandeis they had a tremendous Jewish studies department. I hadn't even set foot into a Hillel up to that point at Brandeis. Jewish University, Jewish Hillel. I just wasn't into it until this kind of a turn came. Then I went and I found, well, who was there? I took a class from men, among other people. Others touched me well, but in reference to here, Klatzkin, who was a prominent figure in German Jewish intellectual life during the 1920s, who worked as a young man with the amazing philosopher Franz Rosenzweig, who he introduced me to in this class, and with Martin Buber. And he was teaching a class on Buber and Rosenzweig and other modern Jewish thinkers, which just reeled me right in. And I saw in those people in Buber, who I'd already met, and then in this other great German thinker, Franz Rosenzweig, who was so thoroughly and deeply Jewish and such a tremendous intellectual. He was a person who could overcome the prejudices in the German university system to have a Jew teach German philosophy, to be the first Jew accepted to teach Hegel in a German university as a full professor. And when he got the appointment, he turned it away to set up a place of Jewish learning, to welcome in Jews with no prior commitments, didn't care whether you're Orthodox, conservative, reform. He wasn't going to brand it with any particular name. Just, you're here because you're a Jew and you're being drawn towards the center, which draws us all, and we're all in its orbit, no matter where it is. Let's see each other and appreciate each other. I came to understand through Rosenzweig how you could be intellectually honest and get deeply into the learning. He showed a whole pathway. It would need a whole other hour and a quarter, hour and a half to talk about Rosenzweig. You just dip your toe in it, so I'll just have to take my word on it. Better yet, go find a book. Glatzer's book on Rosenzweig's life, and with some beautiful excerpts from his philosophy to get a taste of it yourself. And with all of that, I was ready, and I'd taken a bunch of courses my senior year with other wonderful professors there at Brandeis. I went off to Jerusalem for I was accepted at HUC, and first years in Jerusalem for reform study. It has been for quite some time since Nelson Glick was at the head of HUC back then. And it was quite the year. It had a lot of things happen to it. I made a resolution. I want to try to get to as many synagogues as I can in Jerusalem, see every committed Jewish life that's present in our ancient and modern capital. I made the rounds. I went to a lot of different places. One of them I met Rabbi Steinsaltz, saw interesting character. It was an outdoor meeting. I can't remember exactly what it was about, maybe some study. It didn't deeply touch me just yet, but a guy with lots of energy, talked a lot, red hair, he had a large belly, he had Gaucher's disease, with a very swollen, was it the spleen? I think it's very small. You saw him, he stood out. But where I really had my first great interaction with him was this. It was Yom Kippur that year that I was there, 1973. And I decided to go, the place that I had fixed to go on was a synagogue called the Tzemach Tzedek Shul. It was on Rehov Chabad in the Old City. I wanted to be in the Old City. I didn't go there at nighttime. I went there in the day, and I walked into the Old City, and it was beautiful old building, the way the buildings are in the Jewish quarter. And it was a nice prayer service. I enjoyed it deeply. I was that time my Hebrew was already getting better. I could be comfortable in the prayers. It was the energy was nice. And the day went on, as Yom Kippur does, and it was in the afternoon, taking a break, about an hour's break or something between the long Musaf service and then the afternoon service. And we're outside in the courtyard, just kind of talking, little wind wire, fasting for a long time. All of a sudden, sirens start to go off, and people are running through the alleyways, and all of a sudden the word gets out that it's war. War has broken out. Suddenly I realized what happened early that morning, and jets flew over the completely quiet city. Low level jet going by. So weird. Why would they break Yom Kippur like that? Apparently, people knew something was afoot and something was happening. Then everybody knew it. There was confusion everywhere. People had to get to their units and things like that. They didn't know where to go. It was just so sudden and nothing had exploded. And we were all dismayed and things were up in the air. And Rabbi Steinsaltz was there with us. He was there in that synagogue that day. And he sees the situation. He has a smile on his face. It says in Hebrew, and then translated it for the English people who don't understand it, that everybody has their station. We have ours. Let's go back in and finish the prayers. And most synagogues in the Old City didn't finish the prayers that day. But we finished it. And Rabbi Steinsaltz walked with me and another student back across the city towards where we were going. The city was already blacked out because the war was dangerous. And I kept running into him during the course of that day. But this day was already, and we were in the war for 2 weeks. And then the pall of the war was cast over the whole country after that. We were finding our way out of the deep darkness there because everybody felt how close disaster had been. And then after the war, at least we drove that back and drove that away, but so many people had fallen. And there was that coming down from that great high after the 6-Day War, where like we were on top of the world. And it was, so people were everywhere, the sense of searching. And I found out during that time, it was about the middle of the winter, that actually in the dormitory that I was staying at as an HUC student, which the HUC didn't have its own dormitory, it was an arrangement with Hebrew University, Rabbi Steinsaltz was teaching a weekly lesson in Torah in the little synagogue that was on the second floor of the dormitory. I had no idea it was there. It was just being done quietly. I said, I'm going to join this. So Tuesday nights, I went down, and there was this little group. It didn't look like people, you know, like I might look nowadays with a long beard, and if you catch me on a holiday on Shabbos with a long black coat, like my ancestors wore over in Russia, 100, 200 years ago. Yeah, just regular people, like everybody here right now. And among the people sitting around the table was the ex-president of Israel, Zalman Shazar. And he's talking, he was teaching from Hasidic thought. Oh, I got introduced to that from Buber. But here it is as a way of using your mind, your intellect, to be able to focus in on God. Our own Jewish way of being able not to just, as great as they are to learn the stories of the Torah, they always reference them, or to learn laws, but to learn spirituality. How do you learn spirituality? By taking your mind to its limits, acknowledging those limits, and seeing how that opens you to what's beyond it. And there's a whole literature, a deep and an exacting literature that's based on that. And he was teaching a course on it. And with all these people around the table. I later saw a video, one of the men who I'd seen there at this lesson. And he told me how Rabbi Steinsaltz got him into the class. He said, Rabbi, you want me to join the class? You know, I'm not a very religious man. Rabbi Steinsaltz said, yes. You know, what is that? What does that mean? He says, I'll tell you what that means. It says, on Shabbos, I eat bacon. And the rabbi says, only on Shabbos, said Rabbi Steinsaltz to him. And he said, yes, only on Shabbos. That's when I have some time to do that. The rabbi said, well, you're observing Shabbos. It's the way I do it, but you're doing this of having the pleasure of Shabbos. And the guy joined. Why? Was because Rabbi Steinsaltz said, oh, I approve of your eating bacon? That's what he was saying. He was saying to him, I'm not excluding you because where you are in your Jewish life right now, the state you are in your process of coming to be one with our people. I'm opening something up to you. You have a mind. You like to explore things. Come, join us. No preconditions except the respect for this and that your heart is pulling you in that direction. Later on, after that year, which had a tremendous effect on me. And I'm still, before I was here this morning, I was leading a class based on that literature. And one of the people that joins me in that class every week is a rabbi who was in my same class in HUC that year. He's a rabbi for many years in Columbus, is Rabbi Emeritus at one of the great Reform congregations in the city. And he joins me every week in the study. It's deep and it's beautiful and it's powerful stuff. And we go to all kinds of places. And it's really quite the lovely thing. Okay, I'll just jump to another place to show you how he keeps popping up. One more thing. I became acquainted in Israel there, and this is really important, with Rabbi Steinsaltz's great work of translating and commenting on the entire Talmud. A brand new thing he did. What was the idea? Talmud is written largely in Aramaic. He is a teacher in Israel. And his main concern, because he grew up in a non-Orthodox family, in a very secular family, how do I talk to people like I was when I was a kid to get this great literature, which is great stories, the great way of thinking, the great way of getting into meaningful, respectful, loving debate with each other where we raise each other up together? How can I get them into that? Well, the first thing that I have to do is put it into a language they can understand. So he translates everything in the Talmud into modern Hebrew. And of course, I was getting competence in modern Hebrew at that point. So I'm buying this. Now I can get into the Talmud on my own. And then he had a commentary in modern, crisp Hebrew, coming from a viewpoint that anybody could understand. We didn't need any religious background to get it. And that began a study that's lasted until this day. I've completed the entire Talmud twice, working the third time around, starting from there, or at least given the great power push for Rabbi Steinsaltz. Let me skip many years in advance. I came back from there, and I went into, because some of my study at HUC, when I was in Cincinnati for 4 years, opened me up to the world of Jewish philosophy. And I went on to pursue that at Brandeis University. When I was at Brandeis, Rabbi Steinsaltz came to speak. And it was a very interesting thing. He was speaking to all the students at Brandeis who would come. And instead of giving a speech, he had maybe the first American student that ever came to him back in the mid-60s. The guy who was the head Hillel rabbi at Yale University was there. And the whole format of the night was he was going to throw Rabbi Steinsaltz questions. He didn't show him beforehand. And Rabbi Steinsaltz was going to reply. So one of the questions was this, and you'll see how this tied into my own life. He said, Rabbi Steinsaltz, when I first asked you, what is a most important book I could read to prepare myself for real Jewish study on the most authentic level? The answer you gave to me, I thought you were going to give me some Jewish book. He said, it was The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley. Why did you send me in that direction? Rabbi Steinsaltz said, because you don't know the realm the rabbis are talking about. You're not familiar with the world of spirituality that they lived in and thrived in. You're in a modern world where that's foreign to you. I had to open your doors of perception to realize there's something beyond it. It's not just a question of learning something else in the way that you learn it here. It's a matter of getting to the deeper paradigm that's at the center of Jewish life. That we are all in the image of the divine. We are not abstractions. We are not formulas. We're not algorithms. We can't be run by them. We have to be the power behind them. We have to realize what our humanity is. And this is what Rabbi Steinsaltz was teaching us, the core, what will drive us into a commitment in Jewish life. He has gone on so many places. He was the first rabbi to be invited into the Soviet Union when Glasnost came, and there was permission to, above ground, have yeshivas. And he set it up. He set up a whole network of high schools and other schools in Israel to be able to teach Torah as the center of integrated study, to give direction and give unity to all the secular subjects, because as our greatest sages teach, and Rabbi Steinsaltz is certainly one of them, but the great Maimonidean tradition, there's one truth, there is one God, it's all united together. They're not completely separate worlds, they must enrich each other. We have to find the right hierarchy. We can't say like a great German country who had a fantastic scientific reputation and culture, that's enough. We can see when science becomes that which empowers evil, it does more evil than the most barbaric civilization of old could ever do. There has to be something at the core of it to direct everything else. That's what Torah is about. What makes sense, what brings coherence, what is capable of guiding all the other things. Not to get into fruitless battles, science versus religion. As Rabbi Steinsaltz once said in the talk there, people who are in big for the science versus religion thing, they're not deep scientists, and they certainly don't know much about religion. It's really about how do they fit together? How do they work together? How do they complement each other? How do they each bring out the best? And that's what Jewish study is about. That's why it brings us together. That's why it unites us as people. That's why we can't do without it. It's something that we need. It's something that we can all recommit ourselves to. And no matter how high we've gone, no matter how far we've pushed it, that might have been enough for yesterday, might have been enough to get us here today. But the point of getting together as Jews is always, okay, and where can we go tomorrow? We need to set our sights high, push ourselves wherever we are, wherever our heart is pulling us, in this great realm that we have so much literature, so much. There's enough to speak and to touch every heart if we're willing to turn. And as Kesey quoted Hubert, be receptive, to hear we are in dialogue with God who is speaking to us. That is the idea of Torah. No, as Rabbi Steinsaltz once said to somebody who was talking, you know, you're coming up with some theological thing that's third rate and you know it and I know it. The God you don't believe in is the God I don't believe in either. There's inside each of us a God that we really understand and know. The one that we know is there by which we can reject the other concepts of it because they're not worthy. That we have to listen to. That we have to open ourselves up to. That's what we pursue together with each other in a community. That's what Jewish community is about in this time and in every time. And as in the Talmud, where you have one continuous discussion that really, if you look into, well, this rabbi was in this century, this rabbi was centuries later. And then on the side, you have rabbis from later times all talking. Because this joins us in. Time is no longer any impediment. We see across time. We see across space. This unites us. Never asking us what we know is wrong. No, that's not it. Be receptive to that which is at the core. That which we know is really that voice of our authentic identity, the authentic voice of God. And listen to it, determine how to listen to it ever better and better. What's the other great verse that we teach us? The first thing we learn as a Jew, Shema Israel. Listen deeply. It's hearing, but in the sense of hearing and understanding and always opening ourselves to it. That's what we're doing. And the thing is, we learn from our oral Torah, it's not only the listening to God, but what we reply as we teach, as we explore, as we debate. And there's a sense that as we listen to God, you're listened to as well. Try it out. It's something that you shouldn't take on authority, but I have the greatest confidence that to the degree that you try it out yourself, you will not find it lacking. You will find inspiration, and you'll find something that will draw you ever deeper and deeper in. And I measure my success as a teacher and how much that I can actually get out of this. I know we're supposed to reserve some time for questions, and I'm ready to open that up for that.
Okay.
Within our time.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you. Let's give a round of applause. Very thoughtful. Maybe I'll start with a question I thought of when you first started talking. And so when you talked about love your neighbor as yourself, and isn't that the common golden rule? Is that where it came from, right? That was the source?
That's the source.
Okay. So my uncle told me that that was the Christian golden rule. And he says there's a Jewish golden rule. And he says that the difference is, the Jewish golden rule is, do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. And when I asked him to explain that, he basically said, we'll be over here, you'll be over there, we'll leave you alone, you leave us alone, we'll live in peace. You know, I love that. Is there a basis for that in Jewish Talmud, whatever, Talmud?
Well, that is that story from Hillel that I was telling at the beginning, where he tells the person that that's the whole thing. But you're right in saying that's the most basic thing. I'll leave you alone, you leave me alone, which is an awful lot better than civilization did for many centuries. You know, couldn't stand the fact that here we continue as Jews because we're contradicting their story. Just our very existence would so excite people in the most negative sense. So that's the ground level. Let me give you from the very book that Rabbi Steinsaltz was teaching when I entered his class in Jerusalem. He gave an answer to that. The author of the book that he was teaching, that little study group in that Jerusalem dormitory. He said, why did Hillel phrase it in the negative sense? Instead of, we find in Christian scriptures, praise, love your neighbor as yourself, don't do to others as you have them do to you. There's a reasonable interpretation of it. Any rabbi back then, before it became, oh, the Christians say it that way, we say it that way. would probably say the same sort of thing. You know? But why did Hillel choose to do it in the negative? So he said that was showing something really deep. And this is what it meant. Who knows our own shortcomings better than we ourselves? The thing about knowledge is the closer you are to something, the better you know it. The closer you are to it, the better you know it. You have exact knowledge where other people are seeing from a distance. So how do we live with the intimate knowledge we have of our own shortcomings? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. I certainly know what I'm talking about from my own perspective. Well, the rabbi said, love covers over everything. You say, okay, I can go, that's not the real me. Those failures are not really who I am. I'm better than that. And I will live better tomorrow than I did today. That particular failing, I'll get past. Give me a chance. We all want that second chance in so many things and so many times. That's a continuous process. What do we hate? Says the rabbi. We hate somebody who comes and pulls the cover off of us. In the middle, we haven't quite turned from the caterpillar to the butterfly yet. Say, look at you, you miserable creature. We know we're in the middle of this process. They're trying to single us out and point, look at you, they catch us and try to freeze us at the place we know is bad. We hate that. How dare you? I'm trying to get better. We try to become civilized and try to learn from them and say, okay, I'll accept your reproof. You're right, I have to go. But inside, you have to grow in your character to be able to do that. The normal reaction is to get angry at that. We hate that. So Hillel says to him, the guy who's getting this advice, don't do that to other people. See other people in the same process that you're in of growing. Don't break the chrysalis. Let them follow the process of their life and become who they are in God's eyes. And that's as a deep look at it. So on the most concrete thing, keep us religious freedom. Protect us, from people who are going to try to force that you have to have their religious freedom. We can't do without that. We see what happens all over the world when that's allowed. So that's crucial. And he's 100% right to say that. But without that, if it's only that, that's not inspiring. That's just the bare minimum for civilization. What's inspiring is to understand this. We all have an interest in other people becoming the best they can be. Because it's tied into what we know makes our life worthwhile. Why is our life worthwhile? Not because we're already the perfect human being. We all know we're not. It's because we're engaged in the process of becoming better. And we can all do that together. And that's.
Thank you. Other questions? So I'll just relate that I'm on my second marriage. Both of my wives have converted. I'm not getting married again, so this is I've got a net positive contribution to the Jewish people. They converted. And my second wife was so excited about that, we got married, that she made up address labels with a Jewish star on it. And I said, we don't do that. We're very proud of being Jewish. But because of everything our people have been through the ages, we don't advertise. We don't put the target on our back. And it gave her a different perspective because at the time, it was soon after her conversion and our marriage, et cetera, very pleased, very proud. Now you have to understand where Jews have come from and how we've been persecuted all these years, and therefore we have to protect ourselves by not doing certain things. So she understood that. So, and any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Very informative. I appreciate it very much. And I don't think we're going to wait till 1990 to have you back. So what I was into at that time. All the different. And of course I didn't. I did. Kids.
Maybe says. Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.